The truth is, I made some mistakes along the way while cultivating my town garden. But those mistakes are a learning opportunity. What I've learned over the past couple years of backyard gardening will go a long way toward allowing me to feed my family when we finally relocate to our Michigan property. What I envisioned when I started this garden was rows of corn growing up with pumpkins and beans. You know, the three sisters. I wanted a carrot patch and rows of cabbages and Brussels sprouts. A few potatoes would be nice, too. I imagined a little herb garden next to the back door where I could pluck just the right herbs for tonight's supper, and a salad garden right next to it with lettuces, scallions, cherry tomatoes, and cucumbers. I expected to grow enough food to preserve for the whole year right here in my own yard. What I actually got, well, fell a little bit short. I did manage to build a pretty garden, but productivity was a little below expectations. Here's my garden and what I learned along the way. This corner is the sunniest part of my backyard. The long side of my hoop house / high tunnel faces south to catch the sun. We built this tunnel by laying down cardboard and covering it with mushroom-based garden soil. Then we bent over 16-foot long cattle panels and secured them to the ground with rebar. We covered it with white 6mm plastic for a greenhouse effect. It worked for a while, but the plastic kept blowing off in spite of my best efforts to secure it with heavy-duty clips. I've given up on the plastic for now. When we move and I rebuild the hoop house, I'll enclose the ends by building a wood framework to secure the plastic to. I'll also make it taller by building 2-foot-high walls on the sides and securing the cattle panels to that. That way, my very tall, darling husband will be able to come in without stooping over. As you can see, I have onions that have gone to seed. One thing I didn't know about onions is just how much water they need. When I planted these the previous year, I thought the mulch would be enough to keep them moist. Boy, was I wrong. Every single onion set died off before the bulbs could begin to grow. I left them in the ground out of laziness, and they popped up this year and almost immediately started growing flowers. We've now added a drip hose that goes down both sides of the hoop house to keep things watered. I'm not sure how I'll handle irrigation at the new property without a well or electricity, but there will have to be some system in place to keep my onions watered. Another mistake I made was to put my pepper plants in the ground way too early. They weren't mature enough to fight off the pests, and they got eaten right down to the ground. Here I'm replanting some peppers. We don't eat many of them, so just a couple of plants will do. Spoiler alert, I eventually got 2 peppers, one from each plant. Not sure what I did wrong. If you have any suggestions, write them in the comments. Just below the retaining wall, also on the south side of the yard, we built this small raised bed. The plan was to fill it with sunflowers, but none of my sunflowers came up. Well, one did eventually. Someone came down the alley and plucked it before it could go to seed. Anyway, since nothing else was growing there, I decided to put some cucumbers in. These are rather leggy. I learned recently that my grow light was likely too high and that I may have used my heat mat too long. I planned to put a small trellis behind them, but never got around to it. I put in several plants, hoping to get enough cucumbers to pickle. Now we're back in the hoop house, pruning tomatoes. This is one thing I believe I have improved on, but will do more aggressively in the future. I took off the bottom stems of all my tomato plants for 2 purposes. The first is so they wouldn't get fungus from the leaves touching the ground. The second is so they could focus their energy on growing fruit instead of greenery. Next time I grow tomatoes, I'll leave only 1 stem and I'll bring the support string all the way to the ground so they can be clipped up before they start to droop. Let's fast forward a few weeks. The onions have fully blossomed. They make a beautiful flower. Once they dry out, I'll save seeds from some of them. I've heard mosquitoes don't like onions, so I plan to plant thousands of them around my property. Here are my tomatoes. They've started developing flowers. These are the beefsteak tomatoes. The other side of the tunnel has romas. We planted this raspberry patch against the retaining wall that separates the upper level of the backyard from the lower level. One thing I think I did right was to choose several varieties of raspberry. These strange-looking things are, I think, brandywine. They died the first time I planted them. They seem to have done fine the second time around. Unfortunately, Brock doesn't like them. He says the berry clusters are ugly and the fruits are too small and sour. I'm thinking the name should have been a clue to how they would taste. Right next to the brandywines are these lovely red raspberries. I'm pretty sure I ate more of them than Brock did. Delicious. Then there are the yellow raspberries. They're the sweetest of all. This is a perfect little patch for snacking, but I plan to raise enough berries in Michigan for jams and syrups. Next is my corn patch. This was another mistake on my part. We made this little raised bed from some scrap plastic decking. It's too small and too shallow to do much with, especially corn. I planted 3 times the amount of corn that you see here, but I used old seed that hadn't been stored correctly. Corn needs to be planted in abundance because of the way it's pollinated. Just a few stalks won't do much good. These poor unfortunates are my sugar snap peas. Brock asked me to grow these for him to snack on. Again, I got busy and didn't get them all harvested before they developed peas. At the higher level of the yard, we used stock tanks as garden beds. We filled the bottoms with large discarded plastic pots Brock got free from a nursery. Then we added soil, perforated plastic tubing for irrigation, then more soil. The intention was to make self-irrigating planters. We won't be doing that again. It was a waste of time and money. The plants have always done better when I watered them from above instead of below. Here we have some dill that didn't grow the year I planted it. One stalk grew up the following year. Odd. Brock also has some potatoes in this planter. He loves potatoes. Lots of potatoes. These straw bales were another mistake. The first year we had them, I followed the instructions from many YouTube videos. I watered them, fertilized them, waited, watered, waited, checked the temperature. That year nothing grew. Everything I planted there died. This is the second year. I've planted some leftover seed potatoes just to see what they would do. They're still alive. That's a good sign. This is my medicinal herb planter. This beauty is calendula. Calendula is said to have a host of health benefits, which I will not enumerate here. It has the added advantage of attracting honeybees. I also planted chamomile, which went to seed before I could harvest it. This mint is in the right place, but it's a volunteer. I planted it next to the bean tunnel, which never grew beans. I have no idea how it got here. Beside the mint is yarrow. This is another medicinal herb. The leaves are beneficial, but so are the roots. I understand the roots need to be harvested at the beginning of their second year. The basil is here because it was dying in the pot. And here are carrots. Brock's are on the right, mine are on the left. Brock doesn't believe in thinning. I won that debate at harvest time. Here are some more potatoes. We haven't been successful with these. After a lot of research, I think I have the problem figured out. I hadn't been adding compost to the soil at planting, and I also hadn't been loosening the soil deeply enough for the potatoes to really grow. I'll try again in Michigan, with lots of good compost and deeper, looser soil. And these are my sweet potatoes. These grew, but they were only the size of small carrots. The entire bed yielded about half of what we needed for Thanksgiving dinner last year. I know why, but that's part of another story for next time. And finally, what every garden needs, a rain barrel. The only thing I would change here is to use a longer hose and water directly from the barrel instead of a watering can. So what do you think? What might I have done differently that I didn't already mention? Have you been learning to grow food in town? How is your garden growing? Let me know in the comments. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to get more like it and to follow along on my journey from city life in Washington State to an off-grid homestead in Michigan's Upper Peninsula.